Okay, Colonial. Um, so this is the second edition, and there are some changes, according to the rulebook at least. Oh, we gotta do this. This camera looks like it's more crooked. I don't know how much it is. One thing that's great about this one, comparatively, it has this sort of super low light feature, which my other ones did too, but that stupid Samsung did not, which is why in my lighting, the first review I did on it was really horrible. The lamps went out. So, what's up with Colonial? I guess the first thing is, what do you want to review it as? If you want to review it as a Euro, there's one stance you can take. If you want to review it as some sort of close to simulation type thing, there's another stance you can take. And I'm going to be a lot kinder with this than I was with the Wallace game, Struggle of Empires, I believe. Simply because I enjoyed this a lot. And that makes a significant difference in it. However, there are definite flaws with this game. First of all, from that Euro perspective, there is a hell of a lot of luck in this. You can do everything right and the dice can just crap out for you completely. You have almost no assurance that you're going to fall within any particular parameters of results when you start rolling those dice. Even though you're rolling a whole bunch of them, quite often you're looking at numbers that, it's going to be a difference if you're on one side of the bell curve or the other. So it's very easy. It's very easy to fail when you don't think you're going to. It's also what's not obvious, maybe, unless you think, is early on exploration can be very difficult. You could improve your chances of the exploration by not going for the new world right away, but you can get a pretty big bonus off the new world. In the play that I had, Portugal did fine, eventually. They crapped out early on and could have followed a more historical route. Spain, not so fine, and they basically didn't colonize very many places because they didn't get established with exploration roles into a lot of places. Other people who started later and had less seafaring to begin with and everything were able to catch up. So there's one definite thing. If you're a very competitive player, you may be very unhappy with the amount of luck that's involved in this. For me, I kind of enjoy it. I'm not sure, though. There might be too much luck in this for me to even like in an opposed game, except that, my luck tends to be really good in opposed games, so, I'll sit there and feel kind of guilty, but then I'll decide, okay, well, I'll mock the other person for their bad luck. Because nobody minds, most people don't mind when you make fun of them because the dice fucking cheated them. It kind of reinforces their own feeling that the dice are going against them. However, it does actually, and I suspect myself of this, at times work as a psychological attack. If somebody believes that their luck is just not going to work for them, sometimes they'll make additional mistakes, which is something different from, wow, I'm falling so behind due to luck, I've got to risk more. Actually, what I've noticed that it does, is it makes them risk less because they can't afford, because they assume the luck's going to go against them. But at this point, they can't take that conservative strategy anymore. But that's not here or there. The other side of it is, what about as a more historical game? Not as some kind of war game or serious economic simulation, but as something that fits a little better. And there I had a few serious disputes with it. First of all, there you can lead the question, and you can with the luck factor, with the more competitive factor too, of which game do you want to play? the base game where everything's the same. And that obviously doesn't represent any particular historical position, but you can say that the luck factor and everything all kind of rolls into that. And the game doesn't particularly, it doesn't put you in a position that negates history at that very much more abstract and even-handed game. And in some ways I have less of a gripe about that, because it's not pretending to be more about the reality. Not in the sense that, like, even in a sense, though, that by not pretending to that, the flaws aren't really there either. You know, I mean, it's in the detail that some of the flaws start to become more problematic. But some of the flaws are across the board in the game. The most notable example for that is the combat rules. The combat rules have you have wars in the different conflicts in the different land areas, which are all very highly random, right? Based on the number of what are basically trading factors that you have in any given territory. And some of the richer areas like China or whatever, you might have more intense wars. Because of what the resources there are and how they align, they feel very directly aligned with the trading power within that area. Those almost feel more like competition and shouldn't require warfare. The actual warfare, the actual thing that feels like warfare, is the naval combat rules. It's all handled in the same way. It's not like there's, oh my God, I got to deal with naval rules. And if you know me, you know I hate naval rules. No, all the naval rules really say is you can bust the shit out of somebody's fleet, and if you succeeded in breaking through that, you can bust up their merchant fleet, and they will be forced to surrender once they can't attack you, which in essence, in any circumstances, pretty much means once their fleet is gone, although it is possible that there could still be a land combat going on. But yeah. What is not represented is the sort of historical action of using military force to insert yourself into a region more completely. In some limited cases, like the historical India situation between England and France, the military aspect might make a little bit more sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense in other regions for the most part. If you take a look at something like, the Spanish Caribbean ports, which did not allow the English in, well, the English went and, not the Spanish port, let's take Martinique. The English went and seized Martinique and then involved themselves in a trade of that for other territories in Canada, etc. Just in terms of like, yes, we conquered both of these. The French wanted Martinique more, and so we were able to get this, in the peace resolution. This doesn't have a really complicated peace resolution. All it has is, hey, I was able to beat up your economic interests, which may have some military aspects attached to them, in a region and knock them out of the region, making it easier for anyone to go into that vacuum. I haven't gained any kind of dominance over that region, etc. And then on the other side, what I can't do is I can't use my powerful navy to send in, a group of Marines, seize an island, and just say, yeah, this is mine. Nor is there any real representation of the military forces going from, say, the New England colonies up into Canada, what would eventually become the Americas, but the colonies in in North America for the Brits, going into Canada and capturing that. Instead, you have this sort of, you had to put economic production into that area, and then that economic production, the only way you'd have an advantage with it is if you actually had more of the economy than your opponent. It doesn't really represent the reality. It may represent certain slices of it, like I said, with India, possibly a little bit with the Dutch in New Amsterdam, but it doesn't represent the general reality, especially once you get to the 18th century where some of these colonial possessions start changing hands fairly often. That's not here at all. Okay. So these seem like, you know, if you're a Euro player, you're saying, what the fuck is this guy going on about, right? Actually, you probably already turned this off. You probably said, well, too much luck, and this guy is talking about whatever. Okay, but what's fun about it? Well, to some extent, that kind of luck, that kind of high-risk elements, I get a kick out of that. It's a fairly long game, though, when your situation could be badly influenced by early exploration rolls. And especially if you're playing using the nation cards, the rules for that, because you could have advantages that more or less require that you make early exploration rolls, like Spain does, or that you succeed in exploration rolls throughout the course of the game. You could end up in situations that are kind of ugly. I'm not so terribly worried about some sort of runaway leader due to luck, because quite honestly, there is sufficient capability to wipe, to really knock the shit out of someone in this game, if you focus on it. A group of players can beat up another player over the course of their war impulses if they want to take those. So they can knock someone down and make it harder for a leader to win and gain ground on them. But it requires a certain kind of coordination based over the length of the card play, which would say, okay, it's possible that you're just better with your military than someone else and you can beat them up. But there's no real coordinated efforts. There's no alliances that work within the game rules. So what you have, and here we are going to the historical side of things again, so what you have in order to enforce this, although this does affect gameplay, is one person will smack into your navy and, maybe some of your land possessions that they share. And maybe are weaker than you or about equal. Well, they'll drop you down weak enough so that the next player can hit you, and the next player can hit you. The danger with that, of course, is somebody gets lucky who's trying to knock them down and gets the whole takeout, takes their navy out. You can still pick on their merchant fleet, though, and beat that up. Each player can do that in turn as long as they have the appropriate diplomatic level to do that. I found the diplomatic track kind of intriguing, actually, because the idea there is some of the things that you do, like grabbing a monopoly away from someone or grabbing a resource, are things that, or going to war for that matter, are things that piss off Europe in general. Therefore, there's this vague sort of, well, I simply can't go to war because all of Europe would collude against me and take me down. But it's just abstracted in that you either can do it or you can't. It's not like you're facing some consequences for trying it, which of course I would prefer. But as an abstraction, I don't think it's terrible to say, well, we could write all kind of complicated rules that nobody would chance. Or we could just say, you can't do it, Of course, somebody would chance them, and you'd have epic stories out of it. And that's one of the things with the high level of luck that's kind of cool about it, is you get an epic story. It's very exciting when you fail in the face of, fairly easy chances to do something. That's always really humorous in a game too. Maybe not so much if it happens to you, I guess, but I always find it amusing, no matter who it happens to. And playing solo, it creates a framework of what the plot might be, and then you start hanging the actual elements in your own head to figure out, well, what happened? Why didn't I make it? What was, what went wrong? And equally exciting is, I guess, I don't do this because I'm too cautious in general, is the idea of, wow, I really need to do this, I'm falling behind, so I'm going to take a really unlikely roll, and oh look, I somehow succeeded, At least I don't do it intentionally. I did it unintentionally, probably early in the game, and generally failed, which is, of course, the expected. One thing that I want to take a look at this again in comparison, and I almost want to go play it, the Struggle of Empires game by Wallace, to try to understand why is it I am enjoying this and am less willing to be negative about the obvious historical flaws in this, yet was so very disturbed by them in Struggle of Empires. I think there were some mechanisms that just rubbed me wrong in Struggle of Empires and left me with a more general bent towards negativity. Some that maybe I praised in certain ways, like the way the diplomatic system worked, but something about it maybe rubbed me wrong. I can't guarantee that that's the reason. But I'm just speculating here. Another thing is expectations. I had read things about Struggle of Empires where people said, oh, it's so realistic, it's so believable, it's so, so grounded in the history. Well, I forgot that, first of all, I was kind of new to BGG where most of this crap is posted. And I forgot that, or I didn't realize yet that you gotta take who's saying it in line. And until you've spent a few years on the fora and start recognizing some names, you probably are going to be fooled by people who have very different expectations. So, to a Eurogamer, maybe it seems incredibly historically linked. And, but to someone like me, it's kind of like, wow, they go into certain details in this game, and those details are so wrong that they just really hit me. Now, this game goes into certain details, like the combat, that are so wrong that they hit me. On the other hand, there's others, for example, the national goals and the nation cards, that largely make sense to me. Some of the cards have interesting choices on them too, choices that match each other. So, for example, the scientist versus the missionary. I really liked that one. That makes tremendous sense. Do you want to advance elements? Scientist may not be the right word because you're including things like advancing your economy and stuff. But do you want to advance elements of your society as a whole? Your shipbuilding capability, your exploration capability, which is somewhat science-based, of course. Your logistics, how much merchantry you can, or colonization. I'm not even sure what it represents, the Viceroy card. How much of that you can throw into an area at once. And the actual base economy of the country as well. How much of that you can own. Versus the more conservative element of the missionaries who represent, the religious side of things in a large sense tended to be very anti-revolutionary, more reactionary in a lot of ways. Although one could argue very reasonably that Protestant missionaries differed significantly from Catholic missionaries. and there's a question of whether or not the Protestants actually have missionaries in game terms. They certainly did historically, but in game terms, they may not, because they're not they're not something that would conflict with the expansion of scientific thought. Now, let's be fair here, because a lot of scientific thought was progressing in the monasteries during the scholastic period, before the Reformation, within the church, but it wasn't being applied, and that's the key thing. It doesn't matter if it's happening in some ivory tower or stone monastery. It matters only if it's being applied, if it's available and being applied within the nations for the terms of this game. There's more. There are a lot of other little things that kind of worried me and kind of gnawed at my senses in this game. However, it played kind of light. It played kind of easy. You have this programming. This is probably the thing that most people would say. This is the first thing I would hit on the review. Yeah, it's just gameplay, you know. It's one of the last things I think about. You have this programming of your cards that you have to select, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, if you put too much thought into that, it can become a painful type situation with little gain, really. The way I was playing it for most of the game, I put very little thought, and I ended up neglecting certain options, which I would probably undertake now. Some of the options seem less valuable than others. Some of the options rely too much on picking right in comparison to what other people have picked. So, you know, if somebody sends out the merchant right before you send your trader, you could fall into a bonanza. But you probably didn't program it that way. You probably programmed it so you send your merchant and then you send the trader. Which means, you know, there's a fair amount of predictability to the order that things go in. You probably want to keep them close together, like on adjacent cards, because if you leave a space in there, somebody might slip in and grab some shit that you were preparing to deliver. There's some weird capability, and I went into this in the wrap as well. A lot of this I probably do. Some weird capability for players to kind of increase their income by working together with their cards. If you deliver another person's goods, you and that other person both get money. If you deliver your own goods, only you get money. That means if both you and one of your opponents chooses to deliver each other's goods, you essentially make twice as much as you would otherwise. Perhaps. You know. There may be limits, and other people may be able to influence stuff. And that goes with both sides of the delivery mechanism. Let me just see what else there is. A seating order can be important. If one person is to your right, you will almost always do things before them. That can be a very powerful seat to be in. I don't think the opposite is true. I think sitting to someone's right is a disadvantage. I feel like I said things in a way that don't quite work, but I think I may have gotten it right. Who knows? Loans scared the shit out of me, so much that I never took one. I'm still scared of them. I don't know that I made a mistake by avoiding that role. It feels too expensive for what it is, but it might be a way to kickstart yourself a little early. You're not going to get a big loan, though, early in the game, although the English might be able to sleaze one. You might be able to get multiple loans at higher cost, and that might work out worthwhile. It just didn't feel like it was going to. All right, let's chat a little bit about components, which work pretty well. The only problem I had with the component was the blue and black pieces, which under decent lighting are probably visible, but the blue is a little dark for that black. You have a set of stickers, which only actually makes sense, since there are 5 nations, if you're playing the version that I played where the nation option is in play. However, they might help discern whose pieces go with which. The little colony flags, unfortunately, are generic flags, just of a color. They don't have any interesting symbols. They're not based on the national flags. I thought that was kind of a flaw to me. I feel like maybe I'm just too gung-ho on this idea of let's represent the reality a little bit. I know that it excites me a great deal. You have a little player mat, no real issues here. I mean, it has your total victory point count on it. I guess the cards, one problem with the cards, and they're fine for the purpose they're on, they're sturdy enough. One issue with the cards, though, first of all, if you're playing the 5-player Nations version, one of your cards is generally going to be a black card, and it's absolutely obvious if you spread your cards out whether or not you have that deployed. If you just stack them in front of you, that becomes less of an issue, but it's still visibly an issue. I kind of wish there was a bonus card for each one instead of pillaging that other deck. One that only had the character that you have. Some of the choices of what's on the other side of each other make less sense than you might think. I'm not sure what the rebel means, but Viceroy versus Rebel, if you're the Viceroy, well, you're representing order to some extent in terms of you're channeling the no-goodniks of your society into colonization, possibly. The rebel might indicate that some of your no-goodniks are going into someone else's colonies or locations and causing trouble. The trader versus financier, I hate this card. I hate the fact the trader is often, it's the one that moves the goods from the market, which is on the board, which is after they've already come out of the colony locations, back into your treasury. And if you do this, actually I think you can do better than double your money in terms of if you do everything, but if you take turns with both the trader and with the merchant. But the fact that the trader is that, the financier, and it might make some sense in terms of splitting them, that if you're taking loans, somehow you wouldn't, your economy and the inflation, etc., might actually cause you issues where you're not buying as much goods. So there might be a sensible reason for it there. But in terms of gameplay, trader is often something you put out there with the hope that you're going to be able to pull items off the market, and you might be left without that option. And then you're left with the card that I'm not sure you ever want to play, which is the financier, which lets you grab money, lets you take out a loan. The sovereign allows you to go to war. Its opposite is the conqueror. That makes sense. Your military is, I don't know. The words make more sense. The conqueror term makes more sense. Being opposed to what the sovereign does. The sovereign enables you to go to war. The conqueror allows you to found colonies. I'm not sure about that. I don't really understand the link there except just the thematic use of the words. The explorer versus the ambassador. Yeah, I just don't see this one. I feel more like the sovereign and the ambassador should be opposite each other, and maybe the explorer and the conqueror, but that might not play as well. The merchant and governor. The merchant allows you to take goods from trading locations, which don't all have to be your own, equal to the number of your merchant fleets, and send them to the market, where then the trader's going to be able to pull them back. His opposite is the governor, which allows you to put a booming city into place. In a sense, it makes some sense that in both cases you're talking about kind of a free trade with the merchant and the governor. I don't know what the governor. Yeah, I mean, the governor is actually opening the city up so that everyone may and indeed must trade at it, whereas the merchant is doing that trading yourself instead. But at least you can see where maybe the same kind of person would be involved, so it doesn't really hurt there. And then you have the scientist-missionary combination, which I very much like, again, as to it makes a lot of sense that you'd have one or the other, but that you wouldn't be able to play both in a turn easily, unless you are the most religious of all the countries, which is Spain, who has an extra missionary, so they can actually do missionary actions and science at the same time, even though Spanish improvements of various kinds really kind of, and again, they're not really science, related necessarily. But Spain is one of the few countries that really didn't do a lot after the very early era of the exploration. One of the other problems with the cards is they don't explain everything you need to know how to play them, which means you page through the rulebook. And I'll talk about the rulebook. The rulebook pisses me off. It reads fine, but the big problem has to do with the amount of space it takes up and flipping through it. There's a lot of what I consider wasted stuff here. Too many pictures, a lot of white space. I like white space, but man, I just feel like I felt like I was constantly flipping through this huge rule book looking for what really isn't a lot of rules. It's fairly verbose, but otherwise, it's good enough. I think it could, you could probably take a PDF of this, not a PDF, but like a Word doc of this, play with it a little bit, establish it in a couple of columns, get rid of all the imagery and everything. The ordering was also a little strange, but not horribly so. But I did find it obnoxious to actually use, as opposed to, once you found the role that you're looking for, it was clear as hell. So that's about it. The box is a nice starting one too, if that matters. Anyway, I enjoyed it. Probably far too much. I enjoy it more than I respect it. It's kind of a weird thing there. I often tend to respect games. The respect enjoyment thing seems to be almost opposite, and it's weird. I mean, something like EU or La Grande Guerre, you could say, most people would say, oh, such a huge game, such a giant undertaking. Don't you respect that? Yeah, but the things don't work in it, but I love playing the game. And this kind of fits more in that. There's a lot of shit in this that I'm like, wow, that really doesn't work the way I expect it to. If I kind of dig into the thought behind it, I'm not really buying into the story there, but it's fun to play, On the other hand, there's games that I respect greatly, things like Flashpoint Golan, the Fleet series. These things really impress the hell out of me, but I just don't find them much fun. It's not a lot of games that manage to get both for me. I can't even really think of a huge example of that. I mean, the games that I play the most, generally I really like playing, but I don't actually respect them all that much in the morning, They're good time games. Stuff like Empires of the Middle Ages, Empires in Arms. I have a lot of fun with these games, but they have such huge flaws in it. But I don't know, Musket and Pike is kind of fun and respectable. The CWB series is fun and respectable. NBS even more so. So I don't know. You know, whatever you wanna put to my babbling there. I enjoyed it. I don't know how much it's for most people though, because of that combination of it's not really a simulation, and there's too much luck for it to be a competitive game, and it's probably a little big to be kind of a fun game, and the theme and the way it's represented, I'm not sure that it really fits. You know, if you're playing something like Conquest of the Empire or Risk, rolling lots of dice and oh yeah, I kill you. This plays more like that in some ways, but there's a little bit too much thought in the pre-programming to kind of fit that paradigm, and there's a little bit, you know, where it's like, oh yeah, oops, I didn't make it to Brazil. You know, it just doesn't, it doesn't fit at least my imagery of how the players who seem to get really excited about those kind of very high luck dice games tend to be, although I've certainly played with some who I think would get a kick out of this. So I don't know, you know. I try to project and imagine what a competitive player, either competitive in terms of really trying to study the situation and do well, which unfortunately I feel I have too much of a bent towards that. I don't like that in myself, actually. Or that kind of, I don't know, it feels like the kind of person who jumps up and down when, you know, their football team makes a touchdown or something. You know, this sort of unrestrained pleasure at winning, you know, that is just totally not me. I might gloat a little, but not even particularly heavily. I'm more likely to make fun of someone else, either for their die rolling or for making mistakes or anything like that, which can be irritating, I'm sure. Or myself, although usually I just get pissed at myself and then I get pissed at everyone else when I start making mistakes all over the place. I'm not a fun person to game with. Don't get me. Don't think about it. Yeah, so it's hard to find, for me, one of the archetypes of what gamers are like who would really appreciate this in the way that I do. And I don't feel like I fit into one of those archetypes, but then again, maybe nobody really does. All right, we'll send this one up. And I babbled for most of an hour.